listening to the blues here a little bit. That was a little blues harmonica, or as blues musicians call it, a blues harp. It's an ordinary harmonica, but it's played with those bent notes that are such a sound of the blues. You play it in a totally different way. It's a piano improv tip of the month we're doing today, but I thought I'd start with that authentic blues sound. Of course, the harmonica was originally put together for tunes like this. Kind of the Stephen Foster, turn of the century sound, but the blues artists got a hold of it and made those bent notes. So that's an imitation of the vocal style that has those in-between notes, and that's a lot of what is involved in teaching the blues. So there's a lot of resources becoming more and more available for piano teachers about teaching the blues, and they usually have a kind of a stripped down basic approach to it, and I'm sorry to say that sometimes it's clear that the author has just the surface understanding of this genre. So I actually saw it on 11-bar blues in a popular piano method, and blues has a 12-measure form with some variety, sometimes 16 or 8, but never 11. So sometimes as people dabble in a style they don't fully understand, it can rub me the wrong way as a person who spent his life really dealing with understanding the roots of American music. And it's all really good. It's great to expose our students to the sounds and styles of popular music, but it's also good for them to understand that they're going into a very deep ocean indeed. So let me just I have made some notes here. I wrote that blues is a rich and varied musical style with deep roots in American music. Okay, so as with any new musical challenge, as teachers, we want to break it down. We want to make it easy. We want to make it approachable. We want to get that quick win. We want the student to understand the style. But sometimes in the process of doing that, we actually demean the richness of the style. And I see evidence of this when I talk to students, as I am this week in a Suzuki camp here in Columbus, Ohio. And I start my classes saying, what do you think jazz, blues, or improvisation is? And often I'll hear, well, it's when you mess around with the blues scale over 3 chords. And that sounds like a begin-all and end-all, and it's clear to me that the teacher or the resources that led those students to this genre made it too small, when in fact blues has many subgenres, different approaches, great artistry, and it is probably the most influential stream in American music. You hear it in George Gershwin's orchestra writing, you hear it in pop music, you hear it in rock music, and you hear it in blues as a genre itself, with many, many sub-styles inside of that. It has many more than 3 chords in some cases, and in some chords sometimes it has less, just 1 chord. So it is a style that deserves to be pointed out as we teach it, that we are delving into a rich and varied style. It'd be a little like saying all Mozart is messing around with the C major scale over Alberti bass. That's all Mozart is, just some left-hand C chords and some right-hand major scale. You can see how that trivializes the genius of Mozart. In the same way, many of the great blues artists are trivialized if we make it too simple. So it's important to make that point up front, that when you teach the blues, you point it out that it's part of a rich American culture and that we're just scratching the surface, that this lesson is a tip of the iceberg. I just want to say one more thing. If there were too many, if it were that easy to just play the Alberti bass and move around on the C scale over it, or 3 chords and a blues scale over it, there'd be a lot more Mozarts in the world and a lot more great blues artists. But we know that there's more to it than that. So I think I drove that one into the ground. So I'm assuming you know that you've seen my That's Jazz popular series and you've played some of the blues in there, because every book has at least one blues in it. And so I'm not going to, take this down to the level of put your finger here, put your finger there. I'll maybe do a little bit of that. But instead, what I'd like to do is break down how I taught this to a student. I won't play all of it, just give you a little taste of how this kiddo is playing the blues. I'm doing a little drumming there in the background. So I want to break down how I taught this to this kiddo. And I want to first point out that he's not extraordinary. He's not one of those kids walking here with a great ear, great musical experience, doesn't even particularly have a musical family. So while there are super talented musicians out there who seem to have a great intelligence for music, this dude is just a pretty neat regular kid who works hard at all his endeavors. So just a well-rounded regular kid. In fact, he has a soccer uniform on. He's getting ready to run off and play soccer. He does have some things going for him. Number one, he has a genuine love of playing the piano. He loves making music. The love trumps talent. Number two, he has a more or less regular practice routine. For whatever reason, however he did it, his family was able to create conditions where he plays often. Number 3 of 4, and he has an interest in a variety of musical styles. In fact, he came to me because he was a little fed up with his strictly traditional approach, and he really wanted to get into pop, jazz, and blues. And the last one is that he has a mom who embraces my teaching philosophy, which is equal parts reading and improvisation. So those 4 things made it possible for this kiddo to learn this tune, which is called Sweet Home Chicago. It was written by Robert Johnson in the 1920s, a traveling guitar player. And I want to take you through the steps we learned to learn this tune. Even though I sell books and write books for a living, even though I have the best-selling jazz piano method in the world, I'm still going to say this. It's really important to listen to the genre you're copying. So we started with listening. So let's just listen to a little bit of the Blues Brothers, the movie The Blues Brothers. It's actually not them, of course. John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd are not musicians, they're acting. And so really the voice you're going to hear is Eric Clapton, who happens to sometimes live in Columbus, Ohio, where I am. And that's the sound of this blues that many people know because of the popularity of the Blues Brothers movie. Let's listen to just a little bit of that. Intro.
Come on, oh baby, don't you wanna go?
You probably recognize this tune. You know, Great American Blues too, about Chicago.
Back to that same old place, sweet home, Chicago.
So step 1, I'm going to show you 7 steps we used to do this. Step 1 was to listen first. We listened to Sweet Home Chicago in the movie version. We listened to Eric Clapton in the studio recording with a band that had a piano player and an organ player. That video is still out there. We listened to some other young student who recorded himself playing a version of it with his fingers, a very basic version of it with his fingers on the camera. We listened to all kinds of versions of it to get a sense of it. We listened to the old Robert Johnson, really slow, sorrowful way to do that. We listened to Robert Lockwood Jr., the 91-year-old, who was then 91, performing it in a very authentic old style. And we got into the whole gestalt of what blues is about before we tackled the notes. All this being just part of a larger lesson. Step 2 of, 7 steps. Step 2 was to read. Step 2, I gave him a lead sheet of this tune. And it's transposed from E, which is a very friendly key for guitar players, to F, which is more of a friendly key for piano players, especially with the blues. It has to do with the way you can make blue notes become white notes or black notes become white notes. Briefly, this has to do with being able to slide your fingers around like this. Those one-finger scoops are a big part of the blues piano style. And we applied a stock boogie accompaniment that, like I said, you can find in any books anywhere. And they're definitely used in my That's Jazz books. The tune in book 1 is called Blue Note Special, that introduces this pattern. So I think you know it. I'll briefly just hit it. It's at F, C to F, D in this key. It's the pinky F, 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 and on top C, D, C, D. This would be a good time to point out that in my online jazz piano classes, I have multi-cameras, one on my hand, one on my face, and much more ability to see the keyboard and take advantage of all my resources. But Facebook doesn't have so much capability, so it's just fun to do these quick live streams. So number 2 was to read it second, and I gave him that lead sheet, and that you can probably find that lead sheet for free somewhere. This is a public domain tune. And then we learned a tune. Okay, so let me show you what he would have played so far. And I usually play drums with him. One of the things we teach at 88 Creative Keys is how to accompany your students on simple hand drums. But since I can't play the drums and the piano at the same time, I'll just show you a sort of a version with a backing track for an app I love called iReal Pro, iRealPro, which you can put chords in and get a backing track. So I made this backing track with iReal Pro, and with the intro it sounds something like this. This is maybe lesson 2 or 3. Okay, so the next step, after we had the lead sheet and we had could play the tune and keep the little accompaniment going on our left hand, that can take as long as it takes. Then we added details. And if we just take a minute and go back to the listening, and that's what we did, let's go back to the listening, because lead sheets are just barest bones, and arrangements are even worse than lead sheets because they lead you to believe that they're authoritative, or the real authority is in the recording that you're interested in. So let's listen to how brass comes into this recording. I hope this comes through. Here's the same tune, the Blues Brothers. Listen to these brass hits.
Come on, baby, don't you wanna go?
Hear that behind the singer?
Baby, don't you wanna go? Back to that same old.
Okay, so I gave it to my student to figure out what those sounds were. They're just chords. And we added that to this performance. Now, to make this a little bit more fun, just for a minute, I went ahead and put a brass sound on my keyboard to make that top sound work out real well. It turns out in this case, just an F6 chord. We're in the key of F. Play an F6 chord, and we play a classic boogie lick. So let me play the tune with the brass. This is pretty neat. Here's the brass. Details, but not just in the brass. There's also some cool lines down in the bass. So when it comes out here, it's saying back in that same place, sweet home Chicago. What we would normally do is just keep going Chicago, right in the end. But if you listen to the bass player on here, back in that same place, sweet home Chicago. So we had this walk-up, which is also an old boogie piano trick, and so we add all those bass parts and the brass, and we end up with a much more rich version of that. So I'll play that again in a minute. But now, here's what we've done so far. We listened first. We took the music and looked at the lead sheet next. We added details that we heard on the recording. That's a big part of learning to play in popular styles. It's now time to improvise, because it ain't jazz and it ain't blues if we don't have improvisation. And to put that together, we worked on some blues scales, and yes, there are more than one blues scale. In fact, we used, for this tune, a very appropriate one called the bright blues scale, or major blues scale. In this key, the notes are F, G, A flat, A, C, D, F. And we just practiced that scale a little bit just by itself. So I'll play it real low here so we don't get into the brass part on top. Yeah. Yeah, I still have that trumpet on top. Underneath there are lots of things you could do. You could just play Fs. This is just laying the groundwork to get comfortable for some notes that are going to work in this tune. We could play the boogie pattern under there. And we could even mix and match the chords. The point is, we're really working on the right hand. The left hand is just there to hold down the groove. We work that in various ways, first up and down, and then moving around randomly in the scale. And then adding some long notes and some leaps and so on. And that's all detailed in a process I call scaling the chords. I actually have I wasn't going to say this, but I have a PDF about that is available on my website. It's a really good approach to help people get used to improvising. Anyway, so we listened first, we read second, we added details, we integrated technique. We turned Hammond and normal classical scales into blues scales and worked that so the fingers knew their way around the keyboard. So number 5 is in the next few lessons. He improvised with this scale in the right hand while the left hand played various accompaniments. Did he stick to just these notes? No, because there were mistakes and there were unintended notes. And did they sound bad? No, because when the groove's hopping and you're more or less close to your intended notes, then nobody knows, whether you meant it or not. You're like the kitty that tries to jump out the window and hits the glass. I meant to do that. I meant to do that, You save face because there's no right or wrong in blues. It's a feeling. So we explored those, and then I asked him for a key change in the end. So we come up with this form: play the melody, enhance that melody with those brass hits, improvise on the melody for a while, and then come back and play it in the key of G. Come back and play it in, to give it that little lift in the end. voicing there. So the last two steps was so that it didn't just become a piece that comes and goes. I don't do recitals. So instead I said, if you play this well enough, I'll make a video of it. And I'll share it with teachers and friends online. And back in the day when I had a different blog, that's just what I did with that video. And he knew that we were going to make a video, so he played his best, and it gave him that goal. It substituted for the recital business with creating a goal. By the way, in case you think that destroyed his ability to be confident on stage, he plays gigs all the time, and he just did a senior recital. He loves that he organized himself. He loves to play in front of people because they didn't burn him earlier. That's a whole other subject. The last thing we did was celebrate. And so the celebration was that his mom and dad came and she recorded it, and we just made a kind of deal of it towards the end of the lesson. And the new student coming in kind of saw it too. And then later when I was teaching group lessons, I asked him to play it again. And now it's a regular part of his repertoire today as an 18-year-old kid. Okay, so to wrap up, can you do this? Can you do this? Yes, of course you can. Creative teachers move students gradually from the mechanical to the artistic. And they do that by coaching in small, digestible increments. Things like listening for run-on notes or reminding your student that sometimes less is more. You explore together. People are scared to do this because they say, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know enough about this. Neither do I. It's art. We're making it together. We get the basic tools and you work with your student. You're a coach. When you don't know exactly what you're doing and you dive in with them, your student does not respect you less. They respect you more because they admire your ability to be right alongside them, and they realize that music is indeed a journey that nobody ever finishes all the way through. So musical creativity, like any other aspect of music, is learned step by step. One more time, I just want to emphasize, please, when you break it down and make it simple, remind your students that there's a great and rich, beautiful American genre underneath here called blues. In the words of Willie Dixon, blues is the roots, the rest is fruits. When we're talking about American popular music from about post John Philip Sousa to 2 minutes ago, you're going to hear blues streams in it, whether it's blues itself or blues influencing other styles. So to study blues is to really study the rudiments of why American music sounds like what it is. Until next time, enjoy your creative music making journey.